This is Richard Lamb, the author of Biografeats, Life Lessons of Courage, Perseverance, and Triumph. This book contains 24 stories of 12 women and 12 men who built up the courage and persevered over tremendous adversities on their journey to achieving great success. I love to share a few stories from my book. These stories inspired me, and I hope they inspire you. The title of this story is The Pursuit of Happiness. Araminta Ross had an awfully painful childhood. The scars on her head and neck proved it. One day, she was hired out as a housekeeper and babysitter for a woman named Miss Susan. Right away, Araminta had to face the cruelty of her new employer. Araminta was ordered to dust off the furniture and piano, so she rushed through her task as quickly as possible. What she didn't know was that her haste caused a cloud of dust to form, and soon everything that was cleaned was now covered with dust again. But instead of teaching Araminta, Miss Susan took out the whip and punished her with a number of lashes. Araminta suffered more lashes each time she could not keep the baby sleeping quietly through the night. It wasn't long before the abuse took its toll on little Araminta. Battered and malnourished, she was discharged home for recuperation. She was only 5 years old. Mom quickly nursed her child back to health, but only to have her return to Miss Susan. More abuse followed. One day, in the middle of a heated argument between Miss Susan and her husband, Araminta decided to steal a lump of sugar. Just as she put her fingers in the sugar bowl, Miss Susan turned around and saw her. She immediately reached for the whip, but Araminta made a mad dash out the door. She ran as far as she could, until exhaustion forced her to find shelter inside a large pig pen. There I stayed from Friday until the next Tuesday, fighting with those little pigs for potato peelings and other scraps that came down in a trough, she said. Finally, starvation forced Araminta to face the wrath of Miss Susan once more. I was so starved, I know I got to go back to my missus. I hadn't got nowhere else to go, but I knowed what was coming, she said. This time, it was Miss Susan's husband who carried out the punishment. He snuck up from behind and delivered a powerful blow to her side, breaking her ribs. Once again, Araminta was discharged and returned home, debilitated and starved. And again, Mom nursed her back to health. But the rib injury would pain her for the rest of her life. She never went back to work for that abusive woman. For her remaining childhood years, Araminta continued to do domestic labor for various mistresses or female heads of households. As she got older, she became wiser. If the mistress was abusive, she would put on all the thick clothes she could to protect herself from the whip. By the time she reached adolescence, Araminta was reassigned to work in the fields, where she learned to hoe and harvest. It was during this time that she suffered her most painful injury. One night, she went to a nearby dry goods store to buy a few things. When she got to the store, a black man was fleeing from his captor. The captor ordered Araminta to stop the fugitive, but she refused. So the captor quickly grabbed a 2-pound metal weight from the counter and threw it at the running fugitive. Unfortunately, the weight missed the intended target and struck Araminta in the back of the head, breaking her skull. She was bleeding and fainting as she was carried back to the house, where she was laid to rest on a bench without any medical treatment. After 2 days, she went back to the field. I went back to work again, and there I worked with the blood and sweat rolling down my face till I couldn't see, Araminta said. For the third time, she returned home under her mother's care. Araminta never fully recovered from her head injury. For the rest of her life, She experienced uncontrollable episodes of short sleeping spells that caused her to lose concentration and fall into a trance right in the middle of a conversation or while working, several times a day. After her head injury had healed, she went to work for a local entrepreneur named John Stewart sometime around 1835. For the next 5 years, under Stewart's order, Araminta took on the same responsibilities as the men. At only 5 feet tall, her strength and ability to drive oxen, plow fields, chop logs, and haul timber impressed not only her boss, but the male workers as well. These male workers were black people, who were mostly slaves, but some were free of bondage. Araminta became part of this community of freed and enslaved black people and developed a network of friends. One of her friends was a freed black man named John, whom she later married in 1844 at the age of 19. After marrying John, Araminta decided to change her first name and adopt her husband's last name. However, marrying a freed man and changing her name did not change the fact that she was still a slave. The only way to be free was to escape to the north. But she didn't know how, and her husband was against it. By September 1849, Araminta was forced to act. There were rumors that her master was going to sell her at auction. So she took off on September 17 with her 2 brothers, Harry and Ben, leaving her husband behind. After several days on the run, they returned because her 2 brothers feared being captured. If caught, they would either face severe punishment or be sold into the deep south, where they would be forever separated from their family and friends. 2 weeks later, Araminta ran away again, by herself, this time for good. She traveled by night, using the North Star as her compass and instructions from a network of white and black anti-slavery supporters who directed her from one house to the next until she reached Philadelphia. When I found I had crossed that line, Araminta later recalled, I looked at my hands to see if I was the same person. There was such a glory over everything. The sun came like gold through the trees and over the fields, and I felt like I was in heaven. But this feeling of joy didn't last long. She was unhappy. There was no one to welcome me to the land of freedom. I was a stranger in a strange land. And my home, after all, was down in Maryland, because my father, my mother, my brothers and sisters and friends were there. But I was free, and they should be free, Araminta explained. She immediately set her mind on a crusade. She quickly found work in various hotels and private homes as a cook and servant. Every penny was saved with the intent of using her money to rescue all of her family members. It didn't take long for her to act. In December 1850, when she heard news that her niece Keziah was about to be put on the auction block, Araminta returned to Dorchester County, Maryland, at once and made the rescue. On her second expedition, she rescued her brother Moses and 2 other men. In the autumn 1851, Araminta embarked on a third mission to convince her husband to reunite with her in the north. But her hopes were soon dashed. She found out that he married another woman. Even more heartbreaking, he refused to go see her. Although she was devastated, Araminta salvaged her mission by leading a group of slaves to Philadelphia. Her initial successes and strong faith in God gave her the courage and confidence to sustain her crusade. But it was her ingenuity and foresight that made her rescue efforts successful time after time. To lessen the chance of detection, she organized her escapes during the winter, when daylight was short. Escapes began on Saturday evenings because newspaper advertisements on fugitives couldn't be taken out until Monday. This gave the fugitives a 2-day head start. Araminta sang spiritual songs with secret messages to warn her group of impending danger. She paid men to follow bounty hunters and tear down the reward postings. She carried a pistol for protection, as well as for ensuring the success of the mission. On one occasion, a fugitive had second thoughts and wanted to retreat. "You go on or die," she threatened, with her gun pointing to his head. Several days later, he was a freed man. The success of each mission depended heavily on friends who provided food and shelter at strategic locations along the way. Sometimes, she got donations from sympathetic supporters who helped finance her operations. For 11 years, Araminta risked her life again and again while conducting 19 missions in all on her runaway train on the Underground Railroad. Not one passenger was lost. Araminta rescued many people from slavery, and nearly all of her family members. Who was the selfless crusader? Harriet Tubman. For Harriet Tubman, freedom by itself did not bring her happiness. She found happiness by leading her family and friends to freedom. Harriet Tubman's bio. Birth name, Araminta Ross. Birthplace, Dorchester County, Maryland, United States. Birth date, circa 1820. Died, March 10, 1913. Age, 93 years old. Achievements, led over 300 Negroes to freedom. Served as nurse and spy for the Union during the Civil War. Selected quotes by Harriet Tubman. There was one of two things I had a right to, liberty or death. If I could not have one, I would have the other. On my Underground Railroad, I never run off the track, and I never lost a passenger. Slavery is the next thing to hell.